Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Oktane presentation for the CxO Therapy Panel. Anyone who works in security for more than a couple of years realizes that you need to integrate some therapy into security sessions. So we're going to talk about some things that will be very therapeutic. I'm joined by Joyce Edson, the department or the deputy CIO of the city of Los Angeles, and Pedro Agosto, the CIO of DCRA, Washington, D.C. government. Welcome, you two. Really great to have you. Thank you very much for being Okta customers. I'm also joined by John Kindervag, who is, I like to call him the father of zero trust. He coined the term, and I'm going to be discussing with John what zero trust means and kind of get his take on the journey we've been taking over the last 10 plus years. But first, I wanted everyone to introduce themselves and just say what you do and kind of the things that are passionate to you and what you care about and what you think you may need to help someone with therapy on, or maybe you need some therapy for yourself. So, Joyce, can we start with you?
I'm Joyce Edson. I'm the Deputy CIO and Executive Officer for the City of Los Angeles Information Technology Agency, and we're passionate about bringing City Hall and government to the people.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Pedro Agosto. I'm the CIO of the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs in DC. And I and my group here is very passionate about using IT to enable a better customer experience, why we chose Okta.
So that's great. So, John, I know some of the things you're passionate about, but why don't you tell the folks kind of some of the things you're working on and thinking about in this year, 2021?
Yeah, I'm John Kindervag. I am the Senior Vice President of Ontuit, and I'm focused on making Zero Trust easier to do and more consumable by bringing it out as a managed service. I just left Palo Alto Networks after 4 years, and before that, I was a vice president over at Forrester, and that's where I created Zero Trust. And I'm about how do we protect stuff in this digital world that we're in, where people want to steal things and do bad stuff with it, and sometimes that's not just criminal enterprises; it's companies doing bad stuff with our data. So privacy is a big issue for me as well.
So that's a good place to start. Obviously, you coined the term many years ago, and I want to say it was 10 plus years ago when Zero Trust kind of started. How have you seen it evolve? And specifically, and this is something that I'm going to talk to Joyce and Pedro about, how have you seen it evolve and really kind of maybe even take off over the last year as we've been dealing with the pandemic and lockdown and just the change in the way things of, access has been made over the last period of time. So give me your thoughts on, I started this thing, I was the lone guy kind of on a hill yelling this stuff 10 years ago, and where are we now?
Yeah, well, all the people who told me I was an insane guy on the top of the hill are now talking about it. Now, a lot of people get it wrong because they've tried to turn it into a product, and it's a strategy that consumes products. And that's probably the main thing that I'm focused on now is getting people to go back to the strategic vision and not say, here's my zero trust product. There are no zero trust products. There's products that work well in zero trust environments. But the reason you're seeing so much movement about it is because a lot of people, and a lot of people who probably don't want everybody to know who they are, know that zero trust actually protects things from bad stuff happening, primarily data breaches, right? The exfiltration of toxic or sensitive data from your networks or systems into the hands of a malicious actor. This is where everybody gets in trouble. This is what gets CEOs fired. This is, the OPM data breach, right? Or Snowden, Manning, or all Target, Equifax, on and on and on. Mandiant, SolarWinds, all that stuff is about stuff that got out because it wasn't being properly protected. So my focus is how do I get people to adopt authentic zero trust and not just think that I bought this product, so now I have zero trust. And that's my main focus right now.
So it's kind of interesting. So I'm, being the federal CSO at Okta, I think a lot about security all the time. But I'm kind of that weird guy. I'm, to me, technology is an enabler. It enables us to do things. And I look at security as the same way. And Joyce, can you talk a little bit about, kind of how you're enabling better citizen engagement and probably some of the journey that you've had over the last year? What were you thinking before the pandemic and what has the pandemic kind of forced you to rethink? And how does security fit in that as an enabler for better interaction?
Well, the City of Los Angeles is the second largest city in the nation. The biggest problem that the city has is we're also one of the largest geographic cities around. We're 469 square miles with over 4 million people. in order to engage and actually be productive for those citizens, residents, visitors, we have to be digital. But in order to do that, we also have to be secure because we have a responsibility to our constituents and the public to, when we engage with them, to make sure that we're doing it securely and we're not jeopardizing their personal information or their identities. COVID pushed us into this faster than we probably would have gone naturally. But everything that we wanted to do and we had queued up and we're trying to get people to really engage with us on, COVID helped us get that over the finish line. And so we were very, very pleased that we had everything geared up and ready to go with Okta for the Angelino account, which is our public IDM account.
You know,
Nice. And
and one thought on that, Joyce,
sure.
because I've been thinking about COVID as an enabler for a while here, because my wife's brother is one of the primary COVID physicians here in Dallas, where I live. He's a medical school professor who's been pulled out of medical school, and he's been on the front lines since day one of this. And I think the unsung heroes of this pandemic are the people like you, Sean and Pedro, who enabled, and your teams too, who enabled the way to remote work from home remotely and securely. Because if that hadn't happened, if we all had to go to a job in a place with other people just to put food on the table, it would have been a lot worse. So we are the unsung heroes, and that's not a message that is being talked about enough, in my opinion. And the people who stuck it out and ground it out inside of your company to work late nights to make these things happen, uh, man, they are some of the people who really saved the day. And in my view, all IT people were first responders in this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, obviously, Los Angeles, one of my favorite cities. One of my other favorite cities where I was born and raised was Washington, D.C. So, Pedro, can you talk a little bit about how you've kind of taken the same journey or a similar journey to Joyce in enabling better citizen services? It sounds like largely out of necessity, right? Because we kind of had to do it. And you might have had plans to do this before, but I
Right.
think that they kind of got accelerated over the last, 12 months. So talk a little bit about that.
No, you're right. You're right. And here at DC, at DCRA, we had our Vision 2020 initiative, which is really to digitize our services. So we started this a number of months before the pandemic really took hold. And we started with getting all of our services online, making sure that folks could, complete their applications for permits, for licenses, without having to step into our office. Pandemic hit, and we found ourselves, as John was mentioning, scrambling to making sure that we had everything in place for remote posture for our employees. Um, in addition to that, we were going through, because we chose the initiative before the pandemic to go with IAM solution. We went around it from a different standpoint. We had a customer centric standpoint. We wanted to reduce friction to our customer base and getting to our applications. We had a number of applications. People would have to know, a password for this system, an ID for this system. They'd call up having a need for service, and then our customer service agents would have to then figure out, okay, this is the system, and let me come through. We decided to go with Okta as that solution, and when the pandemic hit, we also realized, because we always knew that in the IAM solution, we had that digital identity. We had the ability to do, which we're taking advantage of now, the email verification, which then creates our foundation for two-factor authentication, the ability to go into and understand, some of the points if people are coming in from suspicious geographic areas, particular IPs, or they're hitting our, trying to register, trying to go into our systems multiple times. We're building that framework to have that in place. But we did take advantage of leveraging email verification. So we're at the point now where we've onboarded 11 applications here at DCRA. Last count, we had about 74,000 plus unique identities registered and about 780,000 interactions. So we're seeing the success. We're getting the feedback from people that they love the fact that they just need to remember one ID, one password, very, very low friction to sign up. Um, and, so again, we're just getting that good feedback from the customer base now.
And to me, I mean, I think that's awesome. Again, I think of myself as a citizen. If I wanted to go get a permit to do something, even not during pandemic times, I would want to do that online, right? I wouldn't want to go wait at a building and wait in a line and not do that. If I could have a very, seamless end user experience and just do a couple clicks from my home, I would always opt to do that. So I think this is why, we're taking advantage of some bad things that have kind of forced us to do some good things, I believe. So, John, real quick, I've seen you speak a bunch of times, and I love the fact, you say trust is a four-letter word, or you're wearing your shirt, trust is a vulnerability. I think that getting down to kind of the fact that this is a lifestyle choice, that this is a framework, that this is kind of a belief system, I think is important, right? Because you mentioned at the outset that it's not a product. No one's going to sell you zero trust, and it really is. And you said something before that really kind of speaks to me. It's a bespoke journey. Everyone's journey is a little different. Everyone gets there in a different way and at different speed and kind of different capabilities. So can you talk a little bit about, again, this is a therapy panel. So if someone's out there thinking, how do I get to zero trust? Everyone tells me I need to do it, but I don't know how to do it. How would you coach someone on doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to make it very simple and consumable, and I could talk to anybody who wanted to talk about that, because I can get it down to 9 things you have to do, right? So very simple if you do it my way, but it's consumable in bite-sized chunks. So whatever your favorite consumption metaphor is, you eat the elephant one bite at a time. Some places you eat the whale one bite at a time. You boil the ocean 1 teaspoon at a time. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Whatever that favorite consumption metaphor is, that's what you're doing around zero trust. People try to think it's binary, and that's really a 20th century convention on how we built digital systems. It was all or nothing. And in zero trust, we start with the thing we're protecting. I call that a protect surface. So a single protect surface contains a single DAS element. That's the term. That stands for data, applications, assets, or services. So you might take a single data point, like your credit card database, your card holder data environment, and that credit card information, the PAN or PCI data. That's all you're going to focus on right now, and you're going to build that zero trust environment around it. And it's going to require a number of different technologies that all fit together. So yeah, you're going to have a way to validate identity, authenticate, right? Is what Okta does. So when I was at Palo Alto Networks, our zero trust environment had complete, using Okta as our validator. But you just don't stop there. You continuously monitor all of that traffic, and then you put it together in a systemic way so that you can manage it, and then you build out the next zero trust environment, and then the next one, so it becomes incremental, iterative, non-disruptive. Right? It doesn't break things. So we're still in our 20th century, last century mindset, and we need to move to a 21st century mindset.
So you bring up a great point, which I think is often overlooked, but to me is the simplest explanation of why we do all this stuff. It's all about the data, right? I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, it's all about protecting data and figuring out where the data is, right? It's all this concept of knowing the inventories of data and who has access, who should have access, and those kinds of things. Joyce, how does that inform, some of the work you're doing? Obviously, as we talk about, these things are never done, right? It's a journey that never ends. You're constantly innovating and providing new services. So how do you think about this from like a data centric perspective?
Well, the city is a very diverse organization. We have over 43 different departments, all with their own missions and priorities. They all provide services to the public. And so, what we have to do in the Information Technology Agency is provide the framework that allows everybody to come together as one city. About 4 or 5 years ago, when the CIO and I took office, we did a round with our elected officials and asked them what's important to you. And their response was usability. We need to make City Hall friendlier to our public. And we also want us to be, and if I had a nickel for every time this was said, you need to act more like Amazon. You need to be friendly. You need to be where they come in any door and you know who they are. And there is no millions of user IDs and passwords that people have to remember in order to do business with us. And we need to be there when the city wants us to be there, anytime, anywhere. So those were the loose marching orders, and it took us about 4 or 5 years to get there. But last summer we launched the Angelino account, which is the framework that allows all of the departments to come together at their own pace into a common framework with one user ID, one password. We also launched multi-factor authentication with the idea that there are services where people pay us or we pay them. So again, transfer of money is very important. So we want it to be able to provide that extra security.
Definitely, and I think that's an important topic too. Is the kind of step up capability, or having the ability to kind of control the flow, and based upon your needs of the data. Like, is this the most important data? Then maybe I'm going to step up my security, step up my auth. But again, always keeping in mind the end user experience, not stepping on the end user experience, because I think that's again the thing that we as security people don't do a good job of. We think that, well, if we wrap four walls around it and we make it secure, it's great, and that's all we have to do. And we check all these boxes. But at the end of the day, the business has to be the business, right? The business has to do things with the customers, and you got to be, like Amazon or someone like Amazon, where you're providing a frictionless experience to the extent you can. So I think one of the things, and Pedro, I'm going to pick your brain about this a little bit. One of the things that enables and helps with that is cloud adoption. And I'm old enough to know, if the gray beard didn't give it away, I'm old enough to remember, most government organizations like cloud. I'm never doing cloud. That's terrible. I like my data center. I love my servers. I love to go hug them. So how has cloud kind of changed the dynamic with regards to kind of agility and what you deliver?
Yeah, no. And we've embraced cloud, so it's pretty interesting. A lot of our major system deployments now have been on the cloud, and to us, it gives me a better sense. We have the scalability depending on our data needs, expected volume, but it also allows us to better interact and integrate our various systems because and you're aware of this. So there's some government agencies or even some other private sector companies that they bring in this big monolithic system, and it's the base for everything that's being done in the organization. We've taken a different approach. So we can build around data and then have these different spokes that go out, and a particular application that fits our needs can feed into that central data area. But it requires integration, right? So building all of this stuff out on the cloud makes it a little easier for us, but it does also bring in the challenge of security. And for us, it's what centers around identity access management. Is really knowing before anybody touches our data, we really want to know who they are. We have a goal of being transparent with our services that we offer, and since we are meeting that goal and we're meeting our promise to be transparent, but we're also again keeping the user in mind and the customer in mind, we're trying to wrap some security processes around the need to be transparent with the least friction as possible. But we now know if people are wanting to see the data that we have, we at least know at a basic sense that we know they are who they say they are when they're coming in to consume any of our services. But a lot of that, the ease of use and the ability to scale and to integrate has been made possible. A little bit easier for us, the fact that we're putting a lot of our data out on the cloud.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that to me, and I'm really interested in John's take on this, but to me, it's like cloud and mobility broke the perimeter model, right? It was never really designed for the kind of the world we live in today, where everything is transformative, everything lives outside of boundaries. Cloud is everywhere, mobility from an access perspective is everywhere. But yet we try to wrap the bubble around the network, right? Which is the ins and outs of the bits and bytes, and the bits and bytes can be going and to and from anywhere. And I think this even gets worse with 5G, right? We start talking about networks, organizations getting out of the network business. I mean, they're kind of getting out of the endpoint business. They're getting out of the data providing or the application providing business because they're outsourcing to SaaS or cloud. But I think even in the future, if I had a crystal ball, I think organizations are going to be kind of getting out of the network business. John, do you see that the same way?
Well, first, cloud didn't break the perimeter; hackers broke the perimeter, right? So the fact that we had this complacency that they took advantage of broke the perimeter. The cloud is just somebody else's computer, and it has a network, right? Networks will never go away. It's the question, do you own the network? But it's still just transport. So from my perspective, what I'm doing, Zero Trust, is abstracted off of transport. I don't care what the transport is. But the cloud isn't inherently more secure. It's probably inherently less secure because it's all based on Linux, and all you can do in Linux is a stateless ACL. So the controls are not inherent in the cloud, right? It does make it a little bit easier to do some things and consume some stuff, and I'm a big component of it. But I think cloud security is at a very nascent stage, and if you think you're getting good cloud security from your cloud service provider, you're not. Every hacker knows how to break those clouds, right? So transport and 5G is the same way. It's just transport, right? You've seen my
Right.
presidential limousine thing, right? The limousine is just transport, right? The protect surface is the president and his family. So they could be on Air Force One, they could be on Marine One, they could be on inside the Beast, the limo, or they could be walking on the street. It doesn't matter. They still have the same security controls around them. So let's not confuse or conflate the control system with the transport. Transport is easy, but we spend too much time thinking about the plumbing and the electrical wiring, and not thinking about the systems, and certainly not engaging with the business. That's the first rule of Zero Trust: engage with the business.
No, and I think that's a great point. And Joyce, you talked a little bit earlier about some of your journey with engaging the business and kind of transforming some of the things that the city of Los Angeles was doing. And I think that's another piece. We don't talk enough about it being data centric, all about the data, but yeah, we also don't talk about the fact that this has got to be ingrained in an organization. It's got to involve the business. I always think back to when mobility was still kind of very nascent, and people were trying to figure out how to deploy iPhones and iPads in their organization, and they created these centers of excellence, or they created these environments where they were plugged into the business at the business level and said, how can we help you? How can we enable you? And I think security has to do the same thing. So Joyce, talk a little bit about that, and maybe in the context of what you guys have been through, and maybe some lessons learned. Again, this is a therapy panel, so anything that if you could go back and talk to yourself a year ago, what would be the things you would tell yourself? Hey, you should have done it this way, or hey, great job.
Well, for us, cloud has enabled us to move at the speed of business, honestly. Anybody who works for government knows that government procurement is complex, difficult, and lengthy. So every time somebody wanted to have a system in the good old days, we had to go out and buy a server. And that server was expensive, and it took time to procure, it took time to bring in, it took time to set up, and then it took staff to support and do all of that. Cloud enabled us to move as quickly as our business wanted to move, as our elected wanted us to move. I also know financially it was a lot easier for our chief administrative office to do budgeting, because cloud is a constant spend for us. And yeah, it goes up and down because of usage and all of that, but it is much more of a constant spend than every 5 and unfortunately 7 to 10 years of us coming to them and saying, I needed to buy a brand new server setup. Those kinds of burst expenses for them were very hard for them to budget. When we started getting into the cloud, our electeds and our CAO said, I really don't even want to pay for another server for you ever. Just go to the cloud. So that was good. For us too, I agree, for government, data is our gold. I don't have a product that we create and that we sell. I'm not a bank, so I don't have money, not that the city doesn't have revenue with taxes and permit fees and all of that, but we're not like a private business. Our data is our gold. That's what we generate. So how departments do that with what applications, that really needs to be according to their business needs, their operational needs. It's the data that, as the central IT organization, that I'm most interested in protecting and perpetuating. And that needs to stay. The integrity of that data and the security of that data is what I need to protect long term.
Yeah,
Thank you, John.
And I think that brings up a great point about, how, the cloud is transformational and it's awesome. But to John's point, it's you don't abdicate your security responsibility because you go to a cloud provider. You don't say, well, I'm going to put everything in Amazon or give everything to Okta, and these guys are going to handle all my security. We have a role to play. We call that the shared responsibility model. We have a role to play. Amazon has a role to play. You guys as customers have a role to play, and you provide some of that, or put some of the onus on the user doing multi-factor authentication. What mode are you going to use? Email, push, use Touch ID, Face ID, those kinds of things. So it really is shared across the stack, the responsibility of all security. So Pedro,
what can I say one thing on that there, Sean?
Sure.
Because
yeah.
James Staten at Forrester, when he was the big cloud analyst, he talked about it being the uneven handshake, that it's not really a shared responsibility model. It's an uneven handshake. And if there is a big data breach in an S3 bucket, like happened not so long ago, what's the first thing that happens? The next day, the cloud provider sends out an email, hey, not our fault, right? So there's not really a shared responsibility model. It's almost all on you. The sharing on their side is, yeah, we'll keep it up and running and we'll keep it patched and up to date, but it's all on you, man. It's an uneven handshake, as my buddy James used to say.
So I agree for the most part, but I also think that I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I think it is incumbent upon us CSPs to provide the security for the things that we do. But you're right, you can't abdicate anything, because if you're the owner of the data and you're the one that you care more deeply about your data than anyone else does, because it's your data. And as Joyce points out, it's your gold. So yeah, it ultimately the responsibility stops at your doorstep. But I would say that for folks like Okta and others, we are here to help do that. So Pedro, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Joyce. Therapy session. If you could go back a year ago and talk to younger Pedro, and say, okay, here's what to expect, or here's what you should do, or here's what you should have done better, or here's what you really, kick butt at, what would you say?
Well, a couple things, and then I'll also add with something that we're doing that I kind of feel really good about, and how we're leveraging our identity access with the systems that we have. But definitely the one thing that I would give as advice to folks is, as you're embarking on our IAM initiative with single sign-on, it's really taking the time to look at the user stores for all of your disparate systems that you're trying to bring on onto a single sign-on platform. Because we had a case where we have a customer that can be consuming services from multi applications. Now, they could be John Doe at gmail.com on this app. They could be j.d at gmail on this system. And the biggest challenge was for us to try and do the account linking process, right? We're trying to get to one standard identity that allows you access to these different applications. The the control, the role-based controls are still resident within the applications. So we have to make sure that you, as this verified identity, have access to the data that you logged in before with your separate ID. So that took a while. And that was probably the hardest thing with going on the single sign-on initiative. But that's the advice and the recommendation I give folks. Take time to look at the users that you have in your different systems to make sure you have a plan for integrating them into this single identity. The other thing I want to mention is uh, about a couple of months apart, we also implemented an ECRM platform. So we thought, okay, great, we have all this information. Customers can get to us through traditional means, phone, email, chat. Everything gets recorded. We have a good view of the customer. Now we have Okta. We have an identity that we wanted to marry the two. So we integrated our ECRM platform with our Okta identity so that we could get the idea here was to have a more informed customer service agent. So if you call up or you email or you chat, we can then bring up your customer profile through our ECRM platform and then know what are the services that you're consuming with real-time information based on what you're coming into. If you're primarily a permitting customer, well, we have all this information. We say, okay, great. Oh, and I see that you were dealing with these active permits. It gives the customer service agent more information than they would have today without having to leave our ECRM platform and go to any of these other systems. So that's a use case that we're implementing now that I feel really, really good about, because we're taking systems, we're figuring out what those use cases are to make these systems really enable each other.
No, it's fantastic. So, John, you mentioned earlier that attackers broke the perimeter, which is cool. I very much agree with. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about it, I was thinking about kind of the world we find ourselves in, where we just had SolarWinds. Everyone's dealing with SolarWinds. 10 years ago or so, we had Aurora, which was very similar. We had the OPM breach about the same amount of time ago, and I think that was kind of an offshoot of Aurora as well. It's kind of the world we live in, right, where these things are just going to happen. So, what is the risk of not adopting a zero trust lifestyle or mindset?
Well, it's having a data breach and having leadership, your CEO fired. The only thing that can get a CEO fired that IT can do is a data breach. CEOs don't get fired over ransomware attacks or DDoS attacks or phishing attacks. They might fire somebody, they don't get fired for them. So if you look at the Target CEO got fired, the Equifax CEO got fired, the Sony CEO got fired, the TalkTalk, Ashley Madison, the head of OPM, right? Catherine Archuleta. If you read her Senate testimony, she was so oblivious to the data, and that was the most important data in the entire government. It's the knock list for Mission Impossible 1, right? Who are the spies? And when asked about it, they said, well, why didn't you just at least encrypt the data? And she said, our data was too old to encrypt. That was her actual words to the Congress. And so it's all about the data, just like Joyce said. And data breaches get CEOs fired. And so that's why the business has to be involved in these things. And I guess that's how I tend to look at it. There's too many attacks. So you could make a very good living focusing on identifying attacks, telling people about attacks. But so that's an infinite problem. But there's a finite amount of stuff in any organization that needs to be protected, and that's a much more solvable problem. So I like to solve problems that are solvable, not problems that are insolvable.
No, that's definitely a good thought, and to that point, Joyce, and I think you even talked about it. It starts and ends with the business, right? The business has to be delivered, but I think that getting in the mindset to where security has a seat at the table as you're discussing innovative rollouts and you're discussing capability you're going to deliver to citizens. We have to get out, in my view, we have to get out of this thing where security comes much later, where we've rolled something out and either something happened or we realize, oh yeah, we forgot about the security. We should probably get the security people involved months later. So I think that, and it sounds like you guys are doing it, which is fantastic. But I think, what are some things that you're doing there, and what are some things you frankly think you might do better over time as you adopt this lifestyle?
It's really what you don't know that gets you in trouble. So we do try to keep up with what's going on. We have our CxO, like every big organization has. We do the kind of protections that we're, best practice should be doing. We try to not be overly paranoid, but to be paranoid enough because we are a large city, and so we are just inherently a target. And we don't want that to affect our business, our constituents, our visitors. It's just trying to be proactive instead of reactive. And for a large city and for a government, that's a difficult thing to do. Governments tend to be slow moving, and so trying to be positioned so that when things happen, it's not starting from ground zero. And that's really what we're trying to learn from.
No, agreed.
And it
Agreed.
looks
Pedro?
like Ted Danson's doing a great job as the new mayor of LA, by the way. I've been watching the documentary. So
That's a
awesome.
great
Awesome.
show. That's a great
Yeah.
show. I love it. So Pedro, you don't have a Ted Danson as mayor of DC, but what are some of the things, kind of, last thoughts or things that you always keep in the back of your mind of ways to deliver better services but do it securely?
No, no, and I agree with what Joyce is saying, and I think the other thing is just building that foundation so that we went into this IAM initiative with the understanding, hey, we weren't going to turn everything on. We were going to kind of just get people used to the idea of security, get people used to the idea of registering, having an identity that they can then go and consume services. And then from there, we're going to move to two-factor authentication for systems that are going to require it. And then on behind the scenes, we're going to be looking at what that traffic is. So if we're seeing, you know, um, and this is with the help of Okta, if we're seeing traffic from a blacklisted IP, well, obviously it's going to be blocked, but we'll get alerts. So we'll know who's trying to at least get to our data, so that we can put any measures in place. So we're also going to be able to look at the traffic that may come through to see if we're seeing logins from particular areas that we're concerned about. But all of this is just, so we're as part of our plan, we're just building these little steps along the way when the time is right to be able to balance the need for security with also the need to remove that friction from the customer perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why I'm at Okta is I have the kind of the same beliefs as being identity being kind of core and foundational for all of these things. Being able to know exactly who's requesting access to what data when, and either allowing that or not allowing that based upon context and based upon the environment. So I think that speaks to me. One of the reasons why I think Okta is a strong provider for that, and one of the reasons why I exist here. So I'm going to give each of you kind of a minute or so to talk about, again, therapy sessions. So think about someone from another state on the couch in front of you, and they're struggling with what they're going to do, and what they've been able to do for the past year. What would be your last kind of sage advice? And John, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So you're looking at a world that has so many different gravities on it, right? So you have the gravity of keeping your systems up. You have the gravity of protecting something. You have the gravity of compliance. And so all these things are heavy weights, and they're also conflicting with each other. But my best advice to tell you is don't start with technology. Start by thinking about what you need to protect. If you don't know that, you will always fail because you cannot protect the invisible. You just cannot. So start with what you're going to protect. It makes everything easier. And we haven't learned to do that yet in this industry. We always started at the edge, the endpoints, all of the stuff, and we confuse strategy and tactics. So figure out what your goal is, as Joyce said, figure out what your goal is, and then focus on that, because there's two types of data in the world. There's stuff that people want to steal, and there's everything else. So protect the things that people want to steal.
Sage advice. And yeah, Joyce said it well. She said the things that are kind of scary are things you don't know, right? And then there's a lot you don't know, and being able to kind of figure out what you do know is hard. And I think that's one of the reasons why vendors and other people start with the endpoints and start with the technology, because it's easy. That stuff's the easy part. The hard part is the identifying the data and the data flows. So Joyce, if you had someone laying on the couch in front of you from another city in the US, what advice would you give them?
Figure out what your goal is and do what you can to protect that. The other thing too is that you can't make the protection so that nobody ever gets to your gold, because for us the data is our gold, and that's we need to use that. So you have to figure out what your happy medium is, and just be flexible. You have to be able to be on your toes with this, so you can't get into a system that really locks you into something. You have to be able um, to go with the flow and move, and that probably is one of the hardest things, especially for government to do, because we're by nature big and kind of clumsy. So learn how to become as nimble and agile as you basically can, but not leave your front door wide open.
Yep. So Pedro, what about you?
Yeah, Sean, I would say start the journey as if you're if you know you want to start with the security posture. Don't worry about trying to figure out the total end goal. You start your process and then just be able to adapt along the way, right? So I look at it as if you're making my trip from DC to LA, I'm not going to worry about all the stops along the way. I'm not going to plan that itinerary. I know I want to get there. And if down the road I stop over at the world's largest frying pan site, you know what? I'll stop. It wasn't on my plan, but I'll do it. But it's just building that journey, just figuring out, and in my case, balancing customer friction with security. But just lay it out, go for it, and then figure out at what point you're going to secure certain things. But don't just wait.
Yeah,
So
I think
where is the world's largest frying pan, Pedro?
I think
John's
that's
going
in
to mark that somewhere.
Kansas, right? There's the world's largest frying pan. I think it is in Kansas someplace. I'm not sure.
So at some point, maybe we can all meet at the world's largest frying pan, and we can all go get good places. So I'd like to thank my good friend John Kindervag and my new good friend Pedro and Joyce for joining me today. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I thank Joyce and Pedro. I thank you for trusting Okta to be a partner in this journey with you. It means a lot to us to be able to do that. So with that, we'll say goodbye. Till next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.